I am very pleased to have on the air with us right now Cleve Loveland. He is the voice of real estate. Cleve, are you with us?
I am, Tom. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Cleve, I've been a lawyer in Orlando for a long, long time, but you've been selling real estate for a long, long time as well.
Yeah, about 30 years. Been a broker in Central Florida, selling properties all over the place and on the radio like you. This is funny. This is a big change to the industry you were talking about. I mean, I was glad you called me to tell people about what's going on out there.
So, Cleve, I want to start from the beginning. And for our talking purposes today, let's just assume that the real estate commission is 6%. So let's start with the seller. If a seller comes to you and says, Cleve, I want to sell my house, I want to sign a listing agreement with Loveland Properties, where it used to say 6%, what's being put in there now for the seller?
Well, I would advise everybody, the seller has an option to say, well, I just want to pay you for selling my home or for listing my home. I want to pay you 3%. Let's not pay the other agent. And this is where the government got involved. And most companies I'm talking to, there is still compensation for anybody that brings the buyer through your house. The system has worked for 100 years, but the trouble is it's not advertised in MLS anymore. The MLS cannot put anything in there about compensation for the buyer's agent.
Oh.
So I added a page on my website to show my listings and show how much comp there is for the other agent bringing people through. Our phones have been buzzing. People want to know. And the government did this saying they wanted the consumer to have a little more options, a little more protection. They wanted to know what was being paid. And also as a buyer, you now have to hire your realtor to show you homes. You have to sign a buyer agency agreement.
Okay,
Cleve,
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, okay? So we're still talking about the seller. And traditionally, in the MLS, it would put in there the listing how much the seller is willing to pay the buyer's broker. We know that there are buyers brokers out there that they're looking at they have a buyer. A broker has a buyer. They're looking through the MLS. They're looking for listings that show which listings are going to sell the biggest commission, pay the biggest commission to a buyer's broker, and that has something to do with which houses this broker is going to show to their prospective buyer. Now the buyer's broker has no idea how much the commission is going to be paid.
Yeah, it adds a little step of work there. So they've got 5 homes to show their buyer at, let's say the buyer's at $400,000, and they're going to show 10 homes. Now, if the seller is putting no comp in there, now if they're paying 6% and they're going to split that with the buyer broker, great. That agent has to call my office now and find out how much they're being paid. No problem.
Okay.
I'll return the phone calls. I'll email them back. That's where I see things. Sellers can really hurt themselves if they say, I don't want to pay the buyer broker, and their agent doesn't return phone calls or doesn't return emails in a timely manner. We've got some people out there that are part-time. It might slow things down for that house to be shown. So that could cause a problem.
So what you're saying is for the realistically, at this point in time, a lot of sellers are continuing to pay a 6% commission as a way to attract buyer brokers out there.
Yes, and it's just like new construction. The builders didn't have to change anything of what they do. They always pay a commission, and even sometimes they'll even pay a higher commission because they've got homes that are finished. They want to move them, and they know what they're doing. That's their business, to sell a lot of homes. But if the problem will come is just if a seller wants to get fancy and say, well, I'm not going to pay them. I just want to pay half a commission for my person listing my home. Let's say that buyer doesn't have the down payment and has to pay their realtor. They got a small down payment. They don't have enough to pay that realtor, $12,000. That can cause that house probably will not get showings.
Well, let's say that you have a seller that says, Cleve, I'm only paying 3% to Loveland Properties. That's it, period. Is that going to negatively affect the number of potential buyers that are going to be looking at that seller's house?
Definitely, because you got a lot of people, especially if you're in that starter price range around $400,000. Down payment's the hardest thing for any buyer to get, especially buying their first home. And if that seller is not paying that comp, then the buyer's got to come out of their pocket with it. And if they only had, let's say they had their 5% down, they had $20,000, they need about $10,000 for costs. They need another $12,000 for their agent. They might not have it, and so that home's not going to get shown. That buyer just can't possibly buy that house.
Well, Cleve, if you as a seller's agent found the buyer yourself, it turns out to be a win for the seller because they're paying us 3% commission, something rather than something bigger, possibly.
Well, I can't represent both sides without getting paid on both sides, Tom, just because of the liability and the time invested, because we represent our buyers, too. We want them to be happy with the transaction, too.
Okay.
So they'd have, but with that buyer, well, I don't want to jump ahead of your questions. So,
well, let's go ahead and talk about the buyer's side then, okay? Let's just say that I'm driving around a neighborhood, I'm looking for houses, I see a for sale sign for Cleve Loveland, and you've got a listing, and I'm interested as a buyer. I don't have my own broker, buyer's broker, and I call Cleve and I say, Cleve, I'm just a person. I want to look at this house. What happens then for me as a buyer?
I'm going to have a buyer's broker agreement just for that home. Says, all right, I'm going to represent you on this house, and I'm going to get paid 3%. And if the seller's not offering comp, we would go through the numbers on that. If they are offering comp, great, nothing changes. And that's most of what I've seen, Tom, the past 2 weeks is most companies are just still doing it. Most realtors are doing it business as usual.
Okay.
There's just an extra step in there to see. And I think, over the past 10 years, I've had a lot of people call me. They were listed for 90 days, and then I check and see, and their comp was a little lower. And I said, well, that's why you're not getting traffic. You got a great house here. So that it's always made the wheels go round. And the one, let me go over to the good part for the buyers. Now, let's say you're a buyer and you're buying a big home. You can say, well, I don't want to pay. You can hire your agent and say, I don't want to pay you 3%. I want to pay you 2.5% or 2%. Now, you kind of get what you pay for, just like in everything. That's what the government really that was kind of what was behind the lawsuit and what happened with these changes. You have some flexibility there on some things, and you might be able to shop that around. If you are buying a higher priced home, maybe you're only going to need 2% comp. It really is up to it's a free enterprise system. The agents can say what they're going to make, but I would kind of be scared of the guy that says, sure, I'll do it for 1%. Then you're going to get, I think, you're talking about the difference between Kmart and Saks Fifth Avenue.
Yeah. Cleve, I want to take a break for a minute and say this, that, I have a title company, Edgewater Title Company, and we do a good bit of for sale by owner closings where there's no real estate agent involved for either the buyer or the seller. And we know, what does that mean to us as a closing agent? It means that we have the buyers and sellers calling us all the time to get this deal done, whereas they normally would have called the real estate agent to get this deal done and ask all these questions. And people may say, all you guys do is find a buyer or seller. We know from experience that there's a lot to it after you find a buyer and seller. So I know you guys are earning your money.
Yeah, it's just everything from doing the inspections, sorting through, getting the insurance. Insurance companies are a big problem right now. They want the houses to be perfect. Getting around appraisals, making sure the house appraisal comes in, helping the buyer shop the right financing. Having a seller, you do a building inspection report and there's termites, the buyer might panic, but literally, okay, let's just get a bond. We solve these problems literally daily. And literally there's a lot of work that goes into that 4 to 6 weeks to close a home. There might be another house that has to close. They need their money out of that one so they can take that to buy their new home. All those things that roll in, Tom, our team works really hard to get that done. And buyers just, especially if they're, the mom and dad both work, they got their jobs to go to. They don't have time for handling all these things.
So, Cleve, you and I are in agreement that a real estate agent, whether they're representing the buyer or representing the seller, there's a lot of work to be done beyond just putting a buyer and seller together. You've already said that from a practical point of view, businesses, the way things are done has not changed much. But let's go out 6 months or a year or 2 years from now compared to what it is today. What do you see the changes in going down the road a couple years?
I don't really see it changing too much, Tom. These buyer broker agreements have been around for a while in some of the bigger cities and out on the West Coast, where you've got a lot of properties. The average price is $900,000, and sometimes people are thinking, I don't want to pay my realtor $30,000. But there's so much work that goes in there, and you might work with a buyer for 3, 6, 9 months trying to find them something, and that agent might only sell 3 or 4 homes a year. So it's very important. I don't think much will change. I have a feeling this fourth quarter, There might be some people out there trying not to pay any comp to the buyer's brokers. They're going to be wondering why their house hasn't sold after 60, 90 days. Our market right now, it's stable. It's not great, but it is stable. And homes are selling, and the market is moving. We're still in a seller's market with appreciation. But I think the last quarter of this year, I'm going to have a lot of people calling me saying, hey, my home hasn't sold. I don't know why. And I go straight to the comp.
Yeah.
And I look at that. And because your average realtor is only selling about 4 to 6 homes a year.
I got you.
You do the math on that.
Cleve,
and they got to make a living.
Cleve, this is Cleve Loveland of Loveland Properties. Cleve, tell the listeners how they can reach you.
They can reach me at 407-352-8118 or cleveloveland.com.
Okay. All right, Cleve, thanks so much for calling in. We do so much appreciate it. Give us your great insight on these new rules affecting the paying of commissions to buyers and sellers. Hey, folks, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm joined on the air now by attorney Chris Merrill. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning.
You were listening to us talk about Cleve Loveland, about the new way of paying real estate commissions. And I think one of the key things he said there was it's kind of business as usual in a way.
I would say that the real estate professionals are doing their very best to keep it business as usual. However, there are a lot of components now that will make more steps for those professionals. So when we say business as usual, not quite, in my opinion.
Not quite is a good way to put it. So let's say, we're just keep on talking about it because I'm trying to get it to gel in my head because I do have clients calling me and saying, Tom, what's up about it? Okay. Mm-hmm. But here's another key thing I learned this morning. And that is when a realtor lists a house in MLS, right within the MLS, they put in there, they used to, how much of a commission they would pay to the buyer's broker. And so if you're a buyer's broker and Bill comes to you and says, I want to go out there and find me $1 million house, the buyer's broker is going to be looking through the MLS. And of course, that buyer's broker is going to be trying to find the best house for their buyer client. But they're also going to be looking at what houses are paying the biggest commission to the buyer's broker.
Correct.
And they might be focusing on those houses.
Correct.
Now you can no longer put in the MLS what the commission to the buyer's broker is going to be.
Correct.
And so now the buyer's broker is going out and looking at these houses, and before they make a decision about which houses they're going to show to their buyer client, they're going to have to call the listing agent and saying, okay, I got somebody that's interested in this house. How much is the seller going to pay on a commission if I bring a buyer there?
If any.
If any. And so that certainly makes it harder for a buyer's broker because whereas the information used to be right there in front of them on a computer, now they got to start making phone calls. Cleve Loveland, Voice of Real Estate, was saying that on their website now, they're putting their listings in themselves and what the commission paid to a buyer's broker is, make it a little bit simpler for them.
Exactly. So that's good for Cleve. He's trying to make it a little easier so that if a realtor now, they could at least go to their website, but you'd have to know to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So backing it up, the MLS is the multiple listing service that's available throughout the country. And this has been a very, very key tool for realtors. Why? Because this is where you put all of the properties in there, and it's divided up by regions. Mm-hmm. So these regions, you're going to be looking in your region, and this is, again, this tool because all the information goes into this database, if you will. The database is what is key to giving information to buyers and sellers. So what you were just saying, Tom, step one is when this went into effect a few weeks ago, all of that information was actually wiped out of the MLS. That whatever was in there, gone. Now, moving forward, exactly what you just said is that now you are representing a buyer as a realtor. You have no idea what, if any, now you have to take the next step to figure it out.
You got to call the listing agent.
Correct.
And say, okay, did the seller agree to pay a commission to the buyer's broker?
Correct. If not, you're going to have to approach your buyer about it.
Or move on to another house.
Right.
Yeah.
But again,
Exactly.
yeah, but what if the buyer says we really are interested in that house? Because now here's the other part of it. Remember, because of all the, not MLS is not available to, the everyday consumer. It's available to the realtor professionals. But the buyer looks at different websites and they're saying, I like this, and this one.
Right.
And they're saying to the realtor, hey, you may find others, but we see 1, 2, 3. We want to look at these 3 in addition to. Now the realtor is now saying, well, 1, 2, 3 that they really want to see, the seller is not going to pay a commission, so they have to address it with them.
Exactly. So the buyer's broker is now having to go to their client and say, look, there's 3 houses that you're interested in. None of those 3 houses the seller is willing to pay a commission to the buyer's broker.
Correct.
Therefore, before we go forward, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to pay me to get you into these 3 houses to look around.
Correct.
And if the buyer said, hey, you know what, skip you, I'm going straight to the seller's broker,
Exactly.
the seller's broker is going to do the same thing.
Exactly.
One way or another, if the seller is not paying a commission to the buyer's broker, one way or another, the buyer is going to be paying a commission themselves.
Correct. Right? And so now let's think about it. These buyers are going to look at 6 houses. Well, now you have to distinguish, okay, house 1, 2, and 3, the seller isn't paying, so you have to factor that in, and 4, 5, and 6 are a different way. So you have to think about that as you are looking at these properties.
Yeah, part of what Cleve was saying is that if you're a buyer and you find the house that you love, and on that house the seller is not willing to pay a commission, now we know that you, the buyer, are going to have to pay a commission to the buyer's broker. That's more money that comes out of your pocket
Correct.
to get into this house.
Correct.
That means a house that you might have afforded under normal circumstances,
Correct.
the down payment, closing costs, etc. Now, by the time you factor in the real estate commissions, you can't afford it anymore.
Correct.
But let's get back to it. Cleve was saying, for the most part, things are as usual. Not too much has changed.
Well, again, we're just getting started.
Just getting started. Right. Hey, folks, thanks for all your great calls and questions. We do so much appreciate it. My name is Tom Olsen. The name of the show is Olsen on Law.